we're going to go ahead and have a Q&A with Monique. So whatever questions you have about any of those 5 films you saw, now will be your chance to ask it. So raise your hand and I'll come to you if you've got a question or comment. I'm going to fire the first one. So that's a very different group of films with all different genres, all different things. If you had a favorite genre you like to work in, what would it be based on what we saw?
So, I mean, 4 out of 5 of them were comedies, so comedy is definitely my preference. The drama, I didn't write that one. That was just something I was hired to do. So I like drama, I like stories about social injustice, and I like stories that use comedy to get those points across. In that case with the drama, it didn't use comedy as much to get the point across, but it was still something that I cared about.
But sock puppets.
Yes.
Where did sock puppets come from? That seemed like such a stretch and a different thing for
There's
you.
actually a very obvious answer.
COVID.
The pandemic. I basically spent the entire confinement building those sets and designing those puppets, and was able to record the voice actors over Zoom and then cut it all together. And then we went back basically a year and a half in when we finally started getting like vaccines and people started being able to come out of the house and go back onto sets, and did a 4-day shoot with the sets I had spent like a year and a half building in my apartment. So it was, just like a need to be creative during the pandemic, and I thought sock puppets would be a lot easier than they were. It turns out they're really, really hard. But I know everything about puppets now, and so that actually, what's great when you see the diversity in my work is there are very few jobs that I'm not qualified for now, because I have an action comedy, I have a dark comedy, I have a romantic comedy, I have sock puppets, and like you might not know this, but like even in things like Star Wars, like a lot of the aliens are puppets, and like so there's puppets in a lot of places where you don't know that it's a puppet whenever they're not using special effects. So that actually expands my repertoire and my ability to do different types of stuff. Yeah.
Where did the twistedness of Sorry Not Sorry come from? Because that's my favorite, but I like twisted films. So
yes, I think like Rockabye Baby's pretty twisted. I think like most of it is a little bit twisted. I hope it's all a little bit twisted. I think that's just my brain, which probably comes from my upbringing. I was raised in a hippie house in San Francisco in this sort of idyllic world, and then came out into the world and learned that everything isn't as idyllic as how I thought it was, and so I kind of developed my brand of joyfully cynical humor from that.
I liked it. Good. Any questions or comments for her on any of the 5 films that you just saw, or anything you're dying to know of any of those? All right, right over there. Thank you.
Wonderful films, by the way.
Thank you.
You have a very clever and sardonic sense of humor, and you already kind of answered the question about your hippie background and so forth. I just wanted to know what your comic sources of inspiration have been. Maybe there were people in your environment or something that inspired you creatively?
Watching these films all together, it really, and this is going to come up later when I talk about the film I'm doing next, but I think my father was actually a huge influence on me. When I think about it, like we laughed a lot, and he was very funny and twisted himself, but I think just in a broader sense, I really like comedy that's grounded in reality. I know the sock puppets are a little more out there, but if you actually listen to what they're saying, it's still grounded in reality. I like stuff that's not like impossible, that all feels like it could really happen. It's just a little bit to the left of what you see on a normal day.
Thank you.
And since you had the one drama thrown in there, what prompted you to give drama a try? What made you say, I want to try it? Because it was a really powerful story, and still very timely, very topical. What made you say, I want to give a shot at a drama?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always liked drama. I was a theater major in college, and I was first much more drawn to drama. I was a very dramatic teenager. I was a very dramatic person, and I think comedy is when you just like so dramatic that it becomes funny. And I think that is like kind of my roots as a teenager. Is I was so dramatic that it kind of ended up cracking people up. And so when I was doing plays, and even in college, I found that I found a lot of humor in just like how sad things are. But that particular story came out of, I was teaching a short film writing class at UCLA Extension, and actually the lead actress in that was one of my students, and she wrote that film in my class. And when they finished, I went around and I said, okay, now that you guys have scripts, what are you gonna do with them? And she said, it was on Zoom, it was also during the pandemic. So she was in Kuwait, waking up at 4 a.m. to take my 7 p.m. class every day. And she said, I'm gonna come out to LA and find a director, and I'm gonna make this thing. And I was like, hey, I think it's a really good script. I would love to direct it. So that's what happened.
Well done.
And yeah.
So I'm a filmmaker, and I was watching all the details, lots of details, and that sock movie was really loaded with details. And I wanted to say I really enjoyed when the male character got undressed and you pixelated his butt. That was absolutely wonderful. So
Yeah.
whoever your team should, I just wanted to acknowledge the team for doing that. I'm also a native San Franciscan, third generation, and I love seeing the city again. And that was very clever of going so quickly, because we knew it was San Francisco. You didn't have to dwell or anything on any point. So it was beautifully done, really well done.
Thank you so much for noticing the details. I do put a lot of thought into every detail, into everything I do, and I think most filmmakers that you would know, that any filmmaker that's good does that. But it's one of those things where, like, when you're in the project, you work so hard on little details that no one ever talks about, no one ever points out, you think they're not noticing it. And one time I was at a festival, and they didn't have any, the moderators didn't have any questions, so they just said, well, is there anything you want to talk about? And it was with Sorry Not Sorry, and I was like, well, yeah, I want to talk about some of the details you may not have noticed, like the show coming out of the TV is actually the same script as the sock puppet movie, and the actor who plays the dad is actually the lead of Sorry Not Sorry also. But at the festival, one of the audience members said to me, when I said, like, all these details I put in there that no one ever notices, the audience said to me, it's because of the details that it works so well. It's because of the details that the film ends up being good. So we don't have to notice it, but we would notice it if it weren't there.
Touché.
So I thought that was a really interesting thing I learned from an audience member at a festival.
Where did you get your training? Did you go to film school, or is this just something?
Yeah, I went to UCLA for theater, so I learned all the parts of theater, writing, directing, acting, actually, and actually they made us like build sets and design lights, because it's a comprehensive major there, and all that stuff has come in handy when I've been like an independent filmmaker with no resources and had to do everything myself, and so that was really great. When I graduated from UCLA, I immediately got hired as a director's assistant on network television shows. So I spent the first 3 years of my career working on shows like Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Voyager. I worked on a bunch of 4-camera sitcoms for UPN, like there was a show called In the House with LL Cool J, a show called Sparks with Robin Givens and James Avery, about lawyers. There was I did 30 episodes of television as basically an apprentice by the time I was 26 years old. And during that time, I made my first film, which you did not see here, because it's pretty dated at this point. But I did my first film, and I managed to get a lot of the actors that I had worked with on those shows to be in that, and use some of the crew from that. So I was really came up in a very professional environment, union environment. So moving from that over to independent film it really took my theater background to be able to do independent films.
Well done. Anyone have another question for Monique before I fire? Oh, here we go, right here. Sakina, you'll be next.
I was really intrigued to come here because you use the term shorts, and I'm an aspiring emerging filmmaker, and I'm right now doing the scripting, if you will, or the research for a documentary, and I'm trying to really determine how long this story should be, or is it viable to kind of capsule your story in a short. So I was hoping maybe I would find out what a short was, or how effective a short would be in telling the story. And the first one, Sorry Not Sorry, really intrigued me because I wouldn't say I knew the whole story, but I liked what it said in the story. And I was hoping maybe you can kind of touch on that term, especially as an educator, the difference between a short or a documentary, so to speak.
Right, so there's a couple questions in there, but you have come to the right place. So the difference between a short film and a feature film, and that's one question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the difference between, these are narrative films,
Okay.
right? Which means they have a script.
Okay.
And a documentary is you're following what's happening live and just documenting it.
Okay.
And then figuring out the story from there. Now, a documentary often will have a script as well because you have to go into it knowing what you want to say and what's interesting to you about the topic. So that's the difference between documentary and narrative. The difference between a short and a feature is you can have a lot more side stories in a feature. You can have a lot more subplots in a feature. In a short, you really want to focus really hard on just one thing and just go as deep as you can into just that one thing, But ultimately with your project, I would say, whether it's a feature length, full length project or a short documentary, is going to depend on how much material you have and how much it sustains, These films could have all been longer. But I wanted them to be as tight as they could be. And when you take out the fat, sometimes you have a short. Now, a movie like Sorry Not Sorry, that could not have been longer, I don't think. That was always designed as a short. But like Rockabye Baby, you could see what a feature film version of that, like a full-length version, we might find out what happens to the baby next. Do Rashawn and Mrs. X get back together, at the end of an hour and a half. There's a lot of places that movie could be expanded into a feature.
Okay.
But some of them, they just need to be short.
Hi, I've really enjoyed the films. I wanted to ask about money. How do you finance them to make the films and then try to sell them? Or you get money in advance? Or how does it work to do these shorts?
That is the most challenging part of the whole career. And the fact is, shorts are really not money makers. Very few shorts, if any, make money. Shorts are more of a calling card to do stuff like this and show people what you're capable of. I've used these shorts to get into professional directing training programs with Sony and with the Alliance of Women Directors. Use these to be accepted into those programs. And I've used them to, put myself up for television directing jobs. So the short is really a loss leader against the rest of your career. So you have to find ways of raising the money that isn't, for shorts, where people don't need to make their money back. One thing that's become really popular is fiscal sponsorship. So you can get fiscally sponsored by a nonprofit organization, and then people give their money to the nonprofit. The nonprofit takes a small fee, but then it becomes a 100% tax deduction for the person who gave the money, and they give the rest of the money back to the filmmaker to make their film. So that's kind of become the best way. Obviously, a lot of people do crowdfunding, but ultimately crowdfunding is just asking your friends and family for money, because strangers that don't just go on the internet looking for ways to give their money to short films. Feature films, on the other hand, there is a way to make a profit, and that is usually by casting recognizable actors and raising the money with the intention of trying to get that money back by taking it and distributing it through theaters or through streaming services or even on YouTube with advertising. There's a lot of ways to make money back on a feature film. That's different than a short. Did I answer your question, Chloe?
Thank you.
And right here,
I have screened for our festival for about 21 years now, I think, or maybe more, I'm not sure. And I used to screen everything. And everything years ago was shorter. The features were shorter, the shorts were shorter, the documentaries were shorter. And I'm just wondering how you feel about that, as well as, do you want your shorts to evolve into more feature films?
Yes, yes to all of the above. No, I really do agree that feature films have gotten way too long, and I often, when I'm looking for something to watch, start by looking at the runtime and then go on to what it's about from there. And so I don't know if you notice this about my work, but my work is like really fast paced, and I try to keep it really, really tight, because I do agree that everything should be as short as it can possibly be. And that comes from my background, 20 years as a screenwriter, where I noticed even on the page, if there's any moment of fat, people check out. They get bored. And the same is true when they watch a movie. Like, if there's any moment of fat, people instantly check out. And so, like, I really think everything should always be as short as it can be. And for all those longer movies that the top most famous filmmakers are making, I can usually pick exactly which part of the movie should have been cut. But some of those people are self-indulgent because they have the power to be. And I hope that if I get to that level in my career, I will not be self-indulgent, and I will always think about the audience first.
Just to share with you, oftentimes in our screening through the years, one of the things that when we get together and review what we have rated and whether it's going to get into the festival or not, like your wonderful shorts, we all almost always say it needs editing. So you're right. It has those moments that's a little redundant or slow or repetitive, and it does need to be more concise, and I'm sure that it's really difficult when you're so close to something.
I mean, I think it's difficult for a lot of people. For me, I take great pleasure in cutting things. So, like, just FYI, Sorry Not Sorry, 7.5 minutes. Rockabye Baby is 5.5 minutes. The Lying is Complicated, that's exactly 4 minutes. You know, and even the drama, which dramas tend to be longer, was only 12.5 minutes. The puppet show is supposed to be a half-hour TV show, so it's 26 minutes, but that's because it's a TV show.
So Monique is going to be out in the lobby and the courtyard. You can talk with her more about this. Certainly get involved and take one of those cards. Thank you and congratulations. We're so proud to be part of this journey.